committee. Right?
Sarah's just got to do a full reset.
The trouble is, before games, the chair's got to deal with him like that. He gets away with far too much.
Check. Can we just take a couple of minutes? Sarah's got to do a full reset. We've never done this. Members, we've just got to reset the IT kit because we've never done this coming off this new system and going back on. So Sarah's got to do a full reset of it. So if you want to just take a couple of minutes and then we'll start again.
Roy, can you sit down, please? Right. Okay, now let's continue. So from outside the chamber, there's some councillors here. Any comments about what Andy's presented? Anything that you wish to add to what he said in terms of helping us decide what to put in the scoping document? Any questions you've got direct for Andrew outside the committee first? No? Nothing from outside. Okay. So, as long as it's prevalent to what Andy has said. If you start talking on things that are history, I'm not interested in that today. What I'm interested in is what's going to go in the scoping document. So if you're sensible in what you're saying and it's prevalent to the scoping document, yes, you may speak.
Sadly, I was outside, wasn't I, when Andrew spoke?
Right, so we will move on. Okay, so from inside the committee, who would... Yes, Madri.
Thank you, Chair. One thing that I would like to check on, is the committee going to get a dedicated secretary or someone, or how are we going to minute our meetings and make sure that all the information is collated and presented correctly?
Andrew? The other Andrew.
It's confusing putting us both together. So it will depend on the outcome from your debate this evening as to the route you determine to take. If that's the creation of a TAF, then that would be supported by Democratic Services. If it's not a TAF, sorry, a task and finish group, then that would be work of the committee and Democratic support would be provided in those circumstances as per normal.
Well, if I can put the land in the sand, my view is I think we do need a staff group. I think this is a very complicated subject. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I think we need to support Andrew. And I know Andrew and I have had a conversation, originally thought the officers could do this. I think this is a lot of work, and I'd like to see us add things like going to meet the farmers. I've already, so you're aware, I've spoken to the National Farmers Union, Fiona of Devon, and she's happy to get involved in this. So I think it will be invaluable for us to have a task group, probably 3 people, 4 people who really got an interest in this, and we want to make sure we get the right questions asked. And that brings on to the next thing, is I think what's key is what things do we want answered. And I think if we can think about that, because I think we then got to say to Andrew, this is the scoping that we need, whether it be the number of family farms, etc. So I think we need to put that in our scoping document. Vicky, and then Jenny.
Thank you. I fully appreciate what's been said, etc. But as Andy pointed out earlier, none of us are farmers. So it's very difficult for us as non-farmers to know which are the relevant questions to ask. So again, I would reiterate what I said earlier. If we are going to do a task, is it feasible and possible for a couple of councillors to be on that, a couple of officers, and also ask some of the local farming families if they would like to represent the farmers within the area? So then they can put their points of view across, which I think are more important than our points of view, if that makes sense. They understand how it's going to affect them literally and for generations to come. The other point to make, of course, is, and we were discussing this earlier amongst ourselves here, is that when the government have turned around and said, it's if you've got £1 million, this, that and the other and all the rest of it, they've done that across the board, but different areas have got different pricing. So in East Devon, for example, the land has got a higher value than it has somewhere else. We know that because of the amount of housing that's being built here and how expensive it is. It does seem very much like joined up thinking in some respect. If they make it so that you have to sell some of your land to be able to pay the inheritance tax, that frees up land to build houses on, which the government are also pushing. The issue then, of course, is, as was quite rightly pointed out earlier, once that land's gone, it's gone. And, you know, we're never going to get it back. And not only do we have the farmers and the farming families to think of, regardless of whether you're a farmer yourself, where do you think your food comes from? You know, at the end of the day, we're an island, and we should be using the resources we have here instead of having to import it. All that's going to end up happening is that we're going to have more climate miles, etc., because we're going to have to import more and more. There is no joined up thinking, as far as I can see, from the government with regards to the climate emergency, etc., So I would also ask that we look into, for example, how expensive the land is here, and that's obviously going to push up how much people have to sell, etc., to cover the inheritance tax as opposed to other areas. Because again, it's a blanket, this is what we've decided, nobody else is involved. Thank you.
And I think they're very valid points that would come out within the report that we end up doing. But I think, and I did say it, and the farmers certainly said it, I think one of the concerns I have is having food security. And this could seriously affect it. It won't affect it for the next few years. Of course it won't. But it's my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren that I would worry about. Will there be food security in this country? So I think that is something we want the task group to take away. But the point you made about having farmers, what I would suggest we do there is we actually have some farmers come in and talk to us. They won't be part of the committee, but they could come in and talk and present to us, and we could do an arable farm, we could do a dairy farm. So we could think about how we could do that. But I think it would be invaluable to hear in a closed session what the issues are and how they're going to do it. And I think that could be very valuable. So I think a task group with those people coming in would be absolutely invaluable. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Just in terms of what we've got to think about is our position in this, I think. So as a council, our position is not one where we're making laws, where we're in any position to change any legislation. And I do question the, especially at a time when you know, sort of another top-down government piece of legislation has been thrown on us and we're all talking about devolution. And I know that a lot of officers, you know, are going to be devoting a lot of time as time goes on thinking about that. I hear all of the arguments that the farmers have made today, and I completely agree with all of them. If I had to nail my flag to the mast today, it would be firmly along the, you know, on the get rid of this silly idea. Because this is a crazy idea. It just doesn't work. It's not been thought through. But in terms of us as a council and what we can achieve from this, I do feel the need to ask the question, are we in a position to, and is the end result worth devoting huge amounts of time and officer time and money to coming up with something to take back to full council, which they will then presumably agree with, when I feel really bad saying this, but at best, all we're going to do is send a letter to the government that they're going to look at and go, okay, and then put aside. As an example, we can't change their policy, so we can I think maybe what we've talked about on a much smaller scale, rather than worrying about, the different types of farming, and then coming to a conclusion, getting it done, getting it back to full council as soon as possible so they can do what they need to do and we can have made our point, but we haven't taken up loads of officer time when we're in a position as a council where they haven't got a lot. Yeah,
I understand what you're saying,
you,
but I just remind you that full council asked us to look at this, and remember what they said. They want to know what the effect was on East Devon farmers, and the only way we're going to know that is actually do some work.
Yeah,
I don't disagree with you that we may not change government policy.
Sorry, Chair, I completely agree with you, but it is about focusing very strongly on that then, and not worrying about huge, and compiling a massive report, which seems to be, we're talking about TAFs and things like that. I've seen TAFs here before; they don't work. In a lot of cases, because they have to be, because they're so open-ended. We need to be really careful that this isn't open-ended, and we don't end up worrying about things that we can't really have any.
Look, I agree with that. That is the danger of it, and we won't know until we really start how big this becomes. But I do think there is work that can be done with the TAF that really analyses how many family farms have we got, how many farms is it going to affect, what is the effect going to be. That shouldn't be a phenomenal amount of work to do, and I think we could set the scene for other councils to look at, actually, if East Devon's like that, this must be the same throughout Devon. It must be the same in other places as well. And whilst the government may not take notice of it, but actually, sometimes when it's actual evidence, and remember what was said at full council, many people didn't understand what it really meant. I don't think other councils are taking the same action as us, to actually find truthfully, accurately, what does it actually mean to our farmers and to East Devon?
Just one more point coming back. Just one more point coming back then. In terms of the legislation going through Parliament, at what stage is that at the moment? When's it going to be passed into law? Is it something that will likely happen soon? Because if it is, we need to. We have a time limit.
I really don't know whether or not we can influence that. Andrew, do you know the answer to that? I think it's.
I think, Chair, it's phased introduction from April of this year.
Yeah. Jenny.
Okay, right, yeah, no, I think we should still be going ahead with this. And when you're saying who should be consulted, I think you also should have on there the land agents, like Simmons and Sampson and Greenslade Taylor Hunt, because those gentlemen know these farmers, they know their land values, they know what it means to them, and they can give quite succinct answers to this. And if the government is devolving powers down to unitaries, does that not give us more power to try and support our farmers?
I think I wouldn't be able to answer that. Did you, Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask the question of, you mentioned TAF and closed sessions as one way of getting a smaller group to debate these issues. My slight fear about that is there is sensitivity in the councillor base in general about lack of openness. So if you have a small group of people in a room which is not broadcast to the public, and then some smoke comes out the back door and here's our recommendation to council, that may appear to be anti-democratic. I would like, and given that you've also said that you think some of this data might be quite readily available, I would prefer in the first instance to say to officers, here's a shopping list of what we, the committee, think we want in terms of information. Can the officers find that data in a reasonable timescale, consulting with CLA, NFU, tax experts, etc., in a short period of time, and then come back and we can debate this publicly in scrutiny.
Actually, TAF groups are task groups, and they are done in public. I don't think it's about smoke and mirrors. I don't think it's about not telling, keeping what we're doing from the public. I think it's a much better way to do it when you haven't got any cameras, because people then may well give you some information that they may not under camera. So I would say, if we're going to do a TAF group, which is what I favour, I think that you wouldn't have that in public. So you would when it all comes back. And it might be you have 2 sessions. You might have one public and then the final report, a second public one. But remember, what we wanted to do really is to get the information that accurately says how is it going to affect East Devon. That's the prime objective from the full council meeting. That's what they asked us to do. Peter, you wanted to...
Thank you, Chair.
No, Jenny. She's spoken. Sorry. Peter.
Just going on from what Councillor Johns had said earlier, and also taking on board what Councillor Wibley has just been saying, thinking about MPPF as well. But you want to be careful to how much, if that is going to be, I don't know, included in some way, then you need to be careful not to, because, I mean, where does the land come from? The land is coming from the farmers who's selling off the land. So I think we would start going outside the scope, but if you're not careful, but I think it is important.
We wouldn't get into the planning issues at all. That wouldn't be... what we need to understand, I believe, is if this was to come in, what will the farmers do? And we've heard what the farmers are saying, that actually you could have up to 50% of the farm being sold to keep it, to actually carry on farming. But I'm not going to get down the route in terms of reference talking about planning, Peter. I think that would be too much and out of scope.
Outside your remit,
yes. Absolutely. Did you want Councillor Bailey? Councillor Bailey, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. While I have every sympathy for the farmers, and I support them 100%, but listening to this debate at the moment, I fear we could be in danger of digging too deep, Chair. It's going to take us, members have said it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. I personally think that we should concentrate on the facts that we can gather from our farmers and that our officers can gather, and keep it tight and keep it quick and secure and present it as soon as possible. Because we're talking months down the road here, could be 6 months. Well, the impetus is gone. It's too late. The bill's in, done. Can't do anything about it. So I really think we ought to concentrate, swift, short, sweet, get it done quickly, send it off to the government, and then we can be leaders in this, instead of, if we follow no offence to one, if we follow this particular path, we're going to be followers. And it'll be too late. The stable door, it's too late to close it then, because the horse is long across the fields. Thank you, Chair.
You wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just to kind of pick up on some of the points, really, I think, to be frank, there is a concern from my perspective that in terms of the amount of capacity and resource we have available currently, we are obviously expecting imminently a ministerial letter that will effectively, fire the kind of starting gun around proposals in relation to local government reorganisation. That's going to be a kind of critical area of focus going forward. That said, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but I'm looking at an article in Farmers Weekly that has some initial assessment from a body I've not even heard of before, the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, that gives that assessment of the likely impact from their perspective. And obviously they have the expertise that 80% of farmers, for example, in England, over 50 hectares or 125 acres or thereabouts, will be impacted by these proposals. For me, it's whether we can start as officers to bring together some of that evidence, contextualise it in the context of East Devon with the support of the NFU, and look to hold a single meeting, ideally, Chair, that would make that kind of concentrated process that I think has been described. And obviously, given the phased introduction starting in April, there is a timing imperative as well, Chair. So I know that in the scoping document, it suggests a slightly longer timing than that, but whether it can be condensed. And also picking up, I think, some of the points that are potentially out of scope. Plumbing has just been mentioned, but I think the relationship with the supermarkets, for example, as well, is an area if we can just be clear on that as well.
I think we could. So, can I just summarise what I think you're saying? What you're saying is that we could do some work on data, and this company has done some already, and then put that in a framework that affects Devon. East Devon, sorry. And then we do that work, and then we report that back to maybe the May scrutiny meeting, if that was possible, maybe late April. Yeah, as a start. And if we find from that work, it needs then to form a more formal task group to investigate some of those elements, would that be a more productive way of getting to what full council have asked us to do? I'm asking you before I bring the councillors in. Okay. Go on, Andy.
Thank you. So from my perspective, Chair, there seems to be analysis out there nationally that starts to, if you like, better define the likely impact, including by size of farms. What we haven't done to this point is be able to contextualise that in relation to, if you like, the landholding sizes within the district, what that means with input from the local farming community, the NFU and other partners. So if we can find a way of kind of concentrating that process such that we can bring that back to this committee as a report and says this is what we think the impact is, contextualised to East Devon, and this is what it likely means going forward. It's then a question, you know, whether we can do that as a kind of sharp exercise, Chair, that would be to your satisfaction.
Well, to the committee.
Yeah.
Vicky and then Joe.
Thank you. Is there any reason why we can't just send an initial letter turning around and saying about how it's going to impact our farmers, etc., bearing in mind that we are a farming community within East Devon, and then follow that up later on with all of the information, etc. So hit them double bubble, as it were, but not have to draw it out so long so it covers all the bases.
Sorry, I don't repeat. Send a letter to who?
To the government with reference to the issues, etc., and then follow it up with all of the facts and figures, etc., at a later date.
Council, Vicky, that was what was agreed, and you've heard that the draft's been done, and it's going to go off subject to things and it may be that Tracy will not want to add in that letter that we're doing this work. Is that, have I understood that correctly?
Exactly right, Chair. So there is a draft that highlights the issue, tries to make it more specific to the district, highlights that this work is going to be undertaken, and within the scoping document, there's obviously reference in there to the further analysis that's going to be undertaken, helping to shape potentially a further letter that then properly sets out the likely impact from an East Devon perspective.
Joe.
So as far as I understand, Andy, that happens, that letter happens, then you and sort of other folk will go away and do this work, then we come back and have a scrutiny meeting where it's the main focus of that meeting. We discuss what's in that, and that work will include things like talking to farmers, and then once we've had that meeting and sort of agreed on the major points that we want to make, another letter can be written, and then that can be sent off, or that can go back to full council, and they can agree then to forward that. I mean, in terms of balancing what we can achieve as a council and what we're able to influence, that seems like a perfectly fair thing, and I would propose that as a way forward rather than then looking to draw it out further and further, because as time goes on and on with, I've been told not to call it devolution, with local government reorganisation, because as time goes on, your capacity presumably for everything else is going to get smaller and smaller because other complications will presumably arise. So this seems like a perfect way of doing it. We still get to make our point. We get to support the local farming community, but it doesn't impact on you you and your colleagues to such a huge degree. So I would propose that as a way forward for this, without stretching it out further. Thank you, Chair.
And I think, if I come in, I think it would be a really valuable piece of work the important thing that I'm going to go back to full council because I think it's important. They wanted to know what the effect of East Devon was. They didn't ask us all the other stuff, and I've got real interest. I'd like us to do more, but I do accept what has been said, and I think we actually deliver what the full council asked us to do. I think I'd like to suggest we make sure in that document, we know how many farms we've got in East Devon and the size. I think we need some basic data, but I think your suggestion, and that I think, Joe, you're going to now propose, and I'm sure somebody will second, that we would go with that. Are you all happy to go with that? All those in favour? Right.
Can we just double check the wording, Chair? Can we just check the wording of the recommendation?
Come on, Andrew, what's the
I
wording?
don't think I came up with any wording. I think it was fairly garbled.
No, I think, well,
But-
I've got Sarah's notes and she's made sense
Excellent,
of it.
thank you,
she's with
Sarah.
you. So I think just to be clear, then the recommendation is as per Andy's discussion, we're going to use the analysis that's nationally available relating to I'm going to look at Andy, relating to the size of the farms and the effect that these changes are having. And then we're going to add that to the context within East Devon.
Which you may need help them from the National Farmers Union, people like that, yeah.
Contextualise that to East Devon with support and engagement from partners.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you,
Fantastic.
Andrew.
Everybody's still happy with that as a
Yep.
yeah.
Right,
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Can I thank that's Tracy will deal with that after this meeting, I'm sure, during this coming week. Yes. Can I thank our farmers for coming along tonight? Really appreciate that. I think you've given us some food for thought, and we will make sure we deliver that report because I think you've seen tonight we do support you. You're really important to our county and our country, but thank you very much for coming along. Right, thank you. Right. Okay, shall we move on then to item... I didn't do item 7. There's nothing there. There's no items of decisions to make. So we will now go to the main item on the agenda tonight, or the second main item, is agenda item 8. And I'm going to ask is it Tom going to do it, or... Right, over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So just by way of a quick reminder, so the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, UK SPF, is devolved funding, which has come down from government to district and unitary councils to cover projects relating to things like communities, businesses, skills, and things like that. And that's a 3-year programme, so Cabinet agreed an investment plan for that to be delivered. We're currently in year 3 of that delivery window, but at the beginning of the process, we decided as a council to undertake a thorough evaluation process, not just of the programme overhaul, but each of the projects within it, and also to carry out that evaluation year by year rather than just at the end, so we can refine those projects and make sure that they're meeting various standards such as good value for money, additionality, and they align with corporate and strategic outcomes, for example. So we came to committee last year, and at that point we'd only had about 4 years of activities. It was mostly things like procurement where we were doing an evaluation of. This year we've got a lot more to talk about because those projects have actually started to gear up and they're in action now. So essentially what's happened is Zoe, who's to my left here, has conducted individual evaluations of each of those projects, sat down with the project leads, looked at all of the various outputs and outcomes which have resulted from that. One of the things that came up last year wasn't just the figures, but also the sort of case studies, the written verbal feedback as well, which we've had, which we found this year has been really useful. So in the report, you'll see essentially how we've been getting on with some of the recommendations from last year. And we've also got some new recommendations for further or additional opportunities which come about through devolved funding. And I think the value of this work is particularly pertinent at the moment because we've now learned that there is going to be a 4th year of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. That is going to be sort of filtered through the new county combined authority, Devon County Council essentially. So we will be bidding into that additional pot of funding, and having this evaluation work is really useful in helping to identify which projects we want to move forward with. And again, we'll also be here next year to provide again, feedback on how the final year of the evaluation will go. So thank you. Anything, Zoe?
Well, I know you wrote the report, so I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
I think Tom's covered it off pretty well. I think this has been really useful because I don't only do the evaluation side, but I do the monitoring. And I think I've identified places we can improve next year and how we actually get the data that we need to report back. Something that I've found in going through the project is we're seeing a lot of great impacts, but we don't always have the evidence base for those. And some projects have been able to better sort of gather that data, especially where participants are more willing to share that feedback. So that's been something really instrumental in going forward to year 3 and hopefully beyond as we draft our submission for next year and we look at the outputs and outcomes associated with that.
Yes, many of you may recall it was a year ago when this report first came to us. And we said at the time that majority councils are not really evaluating the way we're evaluating it. And I think the way Zoe and the team have evaluated this is excellent. I think it gives us some really good data. And what I like about it, you can only get better if you know what you could get better at. And what you've said there is classic, that we can improve there. And I think that's all credit to you, and thank you for that. And before I leave it open, I just want to have one concern or comment, and that is when you complete the equalities impact, climate change and risk, which Andrew will know is something I keep on about that we need to do better. There's no doubt this report affects equalities and it affects climate change, because some of the leisure stuff is equalities, some of the youth is equalities, and climate change is decarbonisation. All I would say is I think we need to make sure we record the effect, positive or negative, that this will have under those headings, because I think people will recognise that equalities is something that's really important, and it's actually a positive impact. It's not negative, but it's positive. And I just urge in future reports if we could do that. Other than that, I think it's a really good report. And what I would say to all members, please read the full report. You were going to have the full report of 53 pages tonight as part of the main report, but I convinced Zoe and Tom that no, we would bring it down to a few pages. But there is a link on it, and please, when you've got some time, please, if you haven't done already, please read it, because there's some really valuable things, these actions have done, and I'm delighted now we're going to get a fourth one, and I hope that that will be as successful as these. So, anybody, first of all, outside? Inside? Oh, go that way and then go round there then.
Thank you. And I really want to commend the report, because especially on page 12, paragraph 5.1, the fact that you simplified the grant processes and in C, reduce the 50% match, because I know when I was trying to raise funds for our village, 50% is an immense amount. So what my question actually is a simple one, what roughly is it now? And what is the maximum amount people are allowed to apply for?
Yeah, so you're quite right. We tried, we'd actually run a grant scheme prior to UK SPF, which was from COVID funding and our internal funding, where we had no match funding requirement. It was purely voluntary, but people scored better, essentially, if they put match funding in. So when we moved to the UK SPF and we had to have match funding, that was a government requirement, we didn't quite know originally where to put the threshold. So we started at 50%, and we had much smaller grants, because in year 2 we didn't have as much money as we did in this current financial year. And we found that demand had definitely decreased compared to when there was no match funding requirement. So we sought to change that for year 3. So the match funding requirement is now 30%, and we've seen a significant increase in grant applications, both for our business growth scheme, the Innovation and Resilience Fund, and our decarbonisation grant scheme, which is called the Carbon Action Fund. And yeah, we've been able to spend totally all of our budgets for both of those grant schemes.
So looking at the recommendations, the first 3 sort of all talk about a lack of or not a lack of coordination, but things work better when they're all coordinated. So things like having a consistent project lead, clear and accessible guidance, and a named sort of point of contact. Just in terms of why that became an issue, so I realised that this money sort of arrived fairly quickly, and we were told you got to spend this, and so there was quite a quick process from it when it arrived to us, having to basically think of projects that it would be relevant to or put it in various places. Was it that speed that meant that we weren't able to have those in the first place? Or it doesn't point to any massive failings on East Devon's part, I think is what I'm saying. It's just something that we need to bear in mind in the future.
I think one of the main points to raise there is that staff members move, and and that has been the biggest challenge, if I'm honest. Or project leads have had other things which have come up which they've had to prioritise. So that's been a significant challenge. It was initially. One of the things that came out in the last report was to have this concept of a project guarantor. So each project lead would have someone who can work on the project if, for example, they left the organisation, or if they couldn't put all their time towards it. And that is something we've enacted. Luckily, it's not something we've had to utilise yet, because in the last year, project leads have made consistent. But we are stating for, again, year 4 funding, that is something that will be, again, integral to whatever proposal comes forward to Cabinet in March.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Under the Culture, Leisure and Tourism Fund, would that cover equalities for children and young people in rural or small urban areas? And if it does, how do we access applications? There must be an application form that you would formally make, wouldn't you, through that? I'm just thinking that in some of the areas in East Devon, there's a shortage of facilities or services for young people. And that's something that's quite dear to my heart, being in the profession that I've come from. And I just wonder whether that Culture, Leisure and Tourism Fund would cover that, or would it be the Council Voluntary Service for East Devon? And how would you access? There must be a sort of a Google sort of facility for accessing. Thanks. I just wanted to know, really.
So with regards to the Culture, Leisure and Tourism Fund, that's actually a decarbonisation grant scheme, so it wouldn't come under the Equalities Impact. And it was something that we ran in year 2, and in year 3, we changed the name of the grant scheme and expanded it slightly. So that's the Carbon Action Fund, which we paid their last grants out for in December. With the Council for Voluntary Service, that's a procured provision which is being delivered by Devon Communities Together on our behalf. So they go out to the community organisations operating in East Devon and see what support they need. So they provide training, support in setting up as things like a CIC, and one-to-one guidance and advice as well. So it can be really flexed to the individual support. So if there are particular community groups that you work with and you know of, I would encourage you to direct them towards that support. We've got secured funding for that until, I think, May 2026. So that provision will still be ongoing there.
It's normally me. Yeah, me it was. So this UK SPF money, you had a change of government policy, and it said it threatened several of the council's planned projects, which were forecasting end dates beyond March 2025. So you had to spend the money, or it would have been sent back, had to go back to government. And so you're using it for the toilets, about 600,000, which you didn't get from the government in the end. So were there not any other things that we had going on in East Devon, i.e. coach-friendly tourism, that we could have actually put in some bids for that? Just a question.
That's absolutely fine. So, yes, you're correct. I mean, when we originally envisaged which projects we wanted to fund from the beginning, we were very clear that we wanted to provide additionality. So we didn't want to use this government funding to fund things that we as a council were already doing to make savings, for example. The point that you mentioned with the toilets was, as you quite rightly say, it was a change in government policy, and we had to find an alternative way to get the money spent and to try and ensure that the projects that we did want to continue funding could be continued. So that's on that particular point. And in regards to coach tourism, I think that's something that we might be looking at for this financial year, or maybe even next financial year. As I say, we are currently putting that bid together for year 4. But yes, I mean, as I say, we involved members from the get-go when the investment plan originally came out for the first 3 years. And one of the good things about SPF is that it's quite flexible, as I mentioned with the toilets, for example. So that we do invite project leads who are responsible for each of their pots to be creative, and when new opportunities come up, if they have some funding which they haven't already committed, that they can consider that. The role for me and Zoe and for the UK SPF panel of members is to make sure that that's happening in accordance with, again, our strategic priorities and, of course, any budget that we have remaining.
I think I've got one last question, really. You said it's going to now be for the 4th year. We're going to have a 4th year. Are the headings staying the same, or are they going to change at all? So the headings you've got here with funds, will they be identical for year 4?
By headings, is that the names of the projects?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's actually, the pot for year 4 is reduced compared to year 3. So that's across the board nationally. And so that means naturally we're going to have less to play with, essentially, in year 4. So we've identified a number of projects where we wouldn't necessarily need to fund them in year 4 because of the exercise that we did with the toilets. So that cuts out probably about half of the 12. And of the remaining 6, luckily they're ones that we knew we could continue funding because we have the staff resource there. Again, we have various strategies in place, like the culture strategy, which sort of prolong the funding. So that covers off that. And essentially, we're still having a debate in terms of how much funding is issued to each of the projects. So that's something that we're currently working up at the moment. And a proposal is going to the UK SPF panel on Tuesday next week, because the deadline is Wednesday next week. We've not been given very long at all, less than 2 weeks. So it's been very challenging. Once the panel has sort of endorsed essentially our proposals, those will be sort of submitted and sort of indicatively, and then Cabinet will have a final say on the 5th of March, and we'll be doing things like updating the terms of reference for the panel, various other bits of governance, etc. So yes, we have a plan in place, but yes, it's a lot of work at the moment.
Because in your recommendations last year, you said that you'd bring a report back this year. Because when you did this report, you didn't know, because it's not in here, that you were going to get the 4th year. Could I suggest we just add a line in there that you bring the final report back here in a year's time? Because I find it very valuable hearing what you're doing, and I think we should continue. Maybe something else will happen afterwards. It'll be a different type of scheme, but I think it'll be good to come back here in a year's time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the 2 members. That's the 2 recommendations to note with the additional wording from the chair. Okay, or Karen.
And again, thank you. Sorry. The agenda item 10 we move on to, which is a work programme, pages 17 to 30. Andrew, did you want to take this one? Not really, not really.
I thought I was here for something else this evening,
You
Chair. You do have the work programme in front of you.
Yeah.
I was anticipating there was going to be a workshop that was going to take place at the end of this meeting, which would cover some of that.
Yeah.
Obviously, members did attend Centre for Governance and Scrutiny workshop back in November. And one of those items was discussed was around the work programming and making sure that your work program contained things that were appropriate to be reviewed, right topic, right time, right way, that kind of approach to it. So I think that would kind of feature in the workshop. So I'll leave it for you to decide how you wish to play that. If you'd rather do some work programming on the work program that's in the report tonight.
Well, I think we should
later on
go over the detail one, but I do think we ought to look at our workshop, our work program. The only thing I would say to you is we can set this tonight, but if devolution unitary happens, I think we would need to then say, what are our priorities? Which could change if we go to unitary. And I think we would need to be flexible. So 3 people would like to, Duncan, you were the first one?
Thank you, Chair. The one thing I would say to the work programme is, given our previous discussion on IHT, I think we need to put that in because we agreed that we would come back and debate that. So that probably needs to go top of the list now.
Yep.
For all the reasons that would have been said.
Agreed. Joe? Yeah, that was my point. Right. Well, if we just quickly go down there, the next item is about the enforcement and planning. Now, you all remember we discussed this before, and it was suggested that Ed came and did a informal meeting with us, and not make it formal, so he can openly discuss the challenges with enforcement, because it does come up in many of our email boxes, and it was offered, Ed did offer to come and do an informal meeting. So I think we should program that in. Then we got this next item down here is to, regarding the scoping document for the Exmouth seawall and task and finish forum. Do we want to take that out, or do we want to discuss that in the private session?
I think that's something that's just going to happen, isn't it? I mean, because at this point, it's a thing which is it's ongoing. It's happening at the minute. I don't know what can we add to that.
Well, because you might remember, full council asked us to look at this about 7 months ago.
I can't remember that far back,
Yeah,
Mike.
that's why it's in here. Do we, Andrew? Should we take this in the private session in a minute to discuss whether this should be a priority? Because there is a lot of work involved, and the difficulty Andrew and I have had when we've looked at this, particularly Andrew, is how you scope it, because this could be a really big scoping document. Right.
Yeah. Well, as far as I'm concerned, as a resident of Exmouth, and Aurora and I go along the seafront most days, weather permitting, and we see literally hundreds of people who are absolutely thrilled at the work going on the seawall. It's a great success and it's much appreciated. So I understand the possibility of scoping it, but personally I feel it's unnecessary. It's a success. I've spoken to Jeff Young on numerous occasions. He and I are not the best of friends, but we get on well, and I congratulated him on his wonderful job. And Tom as well, they've done a great job. And I've emphasised that I'd like to keep, along with lots of other people, the railings on top of there instead of putting a seawall back on top of the piling. Because the railings are a lot better and a lot cheaper, and it's going to improve the situation. So as far as my residents are concerned, they're absolutely thrilled. Thank you, Chair.
In the general view, do we want to scope it? No. Okay, thank you. That's we won't use that one. The next one was the sewage one, and that goes into the south, the water one as well, Andrew, doesn't it? Where we were going to get them come back, but then it's whether the issue with whole of Devon looking at this has taken over that.
Yes, and I think that is the case. There has been the Devon-wide summit, and I think from that a number of actions and recommendations have emerged. So I think it would be more appropriate that for a matter that has that impact across the whole of Devon, that it continues that way rather than being something that this Scrutiny Committee.
Just in case you weren't aware, what was happening. We had them, South West Water, but then each of the districts were also having South West Water. And what we suggested actually, and the leader quite rightly said, well, actually, it should be a Devon-wide thing. And that, I think, is now started. And I think that's, personally, I think if you're in agreement, that's the way it should go. Vicky.
So South West Water met up with other district councils and county councils as well. Did they actually come with the answers to the questions? Because they didn't come with the answers to the questions at our meeting. Just asking for a friend.
I'm going to...
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm unable to confirm.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So just to explain what's happened, so the Devon Water Summit did bring together the districts with various representatives, including from South West Water, but also, for example, from the university as well, where there's considerable expertise. One of the speakers was from Plymouth City Council, where they have developed a memorandum of understanding between City Council, the Environment Agency and South West Water, and that is to effectively address the issue you're highlighting, which is that kind of flow of information, how those three bodies work together, and the kind of transparency around that relationship as well. So that was seen, it was a really good presentation, that was seen as an example of best practice. And now there's, I think, a body of work to do through the Devon districts to move that forward into the next stage, to reconvene. Certainly the Plymouth process was the result of a select committee type approach that engaged various partners and led to the MOU being established. And it's whether the Devon districts can also kind of elicit that type of process going forward. I would say that obviously that took place in December. It all preceded the publication of the devolution white paper, which has been a bit of a distraction since then.
Could I just ask, the consultation that you went to, where you turned around and said they spoke and they gave great, on all the rest of it, is that available to view?
So the presentations, absolutely are. I can send those to you.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me speak. I just wanted to raise some concerns in two areas, really. Firstly, for portfolio holder for tourism. Secondly, as a ward member for Exmouth Lyttelham. We have yet again had an overflow on a part of the Mare, the large grass area behind Exmouth Beach, through Lyttelham Brook. This happened last week with a very heavy rain. And the resulting overflow ended up on the beach again, and there has been media interest in this. And while I absolutely support the idea of a Devon-wide approach to South West Water, I think we also need to, from a district point of view, hold South West Water to account and say, when are you going to deal with these overflow issues that we're having from the Lyttelham Brook onto Exmouth Beach? There's a lot of media interest from South West Water, the usual promise of jam tomorrow and all the rest of it, but I really do think it would be much appreciated by residents if we were to try and deal with this issue, which is getting worse because the amount of development that's taken place within Lyttelham Ward. Thank you very much, Chair, for listening to me.
Can I ask Andrew's view on how we might deal with that? Because it's a very fair point.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. Probably I'll just wind back slightly. So I think it was probably last week that Councillor Young was out on site with the Managing Director of South West Water's kind of wastewater arm, if you like. And we started at Mare Road and the pumping station, saw the replacement of the main that's gone to the sewage treatment works, and understood the wider package of works, including the new outfall, and ultimately through to doubling the size of the new wastewater treatment works in that location that is planned over the next 3 years. There's a kind of phase of, a series of phase works. So I think it was very helpful to see that, to engage at a senior level with South West Water on the basis that it's obviously a very serious issue, an environmental health issue as well, given that discharges onto the Mare. And unfortunately, again, obviously it's happened, but clearly there was, we saw firsthand, I think, that the plan works and the actual works that are being undertaken, understood the strategy that South West Water are moving forward with, in order to ensure that issue is mitigated going forward, including dealing or installing the additional capacity needed to support further development as well, Chair. But I absolutely take the point that this is an ongoing issue. It needs proper engagement and scrutiny of the work that's being done. And I think that type of visit, though, and that engagement with the MD was exceptionally helpful in order to understand that programme.
So would it be better we left that item on there for now? Perhaps we could we ask for an update from South West Water, what they're doing about it? Because I think Nick has got some very, very important concerns for the residents. And I think because we started off, although there may be this Devon-wide, but our main concern, to be blunt, is what's happening in East Devon, and particularly what's happening in Exmouth at the moment. So perhaps we could write to them and get a formal response from them. And if that means we have to have them back here separately this summer, we should be prepared to do that, I think. Would you all agree? Because otherwise it just gets kicked down the touch, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. And I think that particularly that programme of works that's being undertaken at Exmouth in particular, I think everyone knows the impact of what happened over the August bank holiday, for example, and the potential kind of lingering impact of that, the necessity to ensure that those works are advanced at pace and delivered, and as far as possible, this issue is fully mitigated going forward. So I think absolutely further report to this committee would help to give you that confidence.
Yeah. So we'll leave that on there then, Sarah, if we may. There is one last one, which is, or two actually, follow-up report from Street Scene on the wildlife. Well, actually, that's been dealt by overview, isn't it?
That's correct, Chair. So there is a planned report on the wildlife improvement areas coming to the next overview meeting.
And then the last one is, sorry, yes.
Chair, I was hoping for an opportunity before you moved on to mention about South West Water. I've tabled 3 questions to our local MP for Exmouth, and he's dealing with it at the moment. One of them was, you're doubling the capacity of the sewage works at Mayor Lane. Why? Because we have great concern over the fact that they're still tankering sludge from various other places in the county where the sewage works locally have failed miserably. So what our concern is that when they put in this super duper all dancing treatment works, we're still going to have tankers coming from all over the place to have the sludge processed there, which obviously is not a desirable thing. And David Reid is still asking on our behalf, and we still haven't got a question, and a reply to the question.
You haven't got an answer.
So we haven't got an answer at all. So this is why I'd like to encourage you to carry on, Chair,
right, well,
and get it sorted out. Thank you very much.
Okay. So that the last one is, I'm a bit confused with this one, but I think I can remember it. It goes back to Cabinet Minute 120, serious violence duty, and then it goes on that this and other wider tasks of duties being given to East Devon from central government be referred to Scrutiny Committee for further discussion and debate. Was this when someone said that East Devon are given all these responsibilities but the money doesn't follow it, and we're taking all these responsibilities over, and so yes, and what should we do about that? Because that is an enormous piece of work. But I'm right, it was about all the extra responsibilities districts are taking on. Maybe we wait and see what happens with the devolution. Maybe at this time. Yes, I think we might hold that one.
That being the case, I might be being incredibly stupid here, but what's a serious violence duty? Because that sounds to me like it's some kind of, like some kind of crime spree or something. I don't know what's going on.
I believe it was government giving us responsibilities under that heading in a cabinet meeting, and it was recommended that scrutiny take it away and look at all the other things that we as a district council are being asked to do without the funding. That's what I recommend. Is that right, Andrew? Yes.
Lots of nods.
Lots of nods. You can't remember that, was it? My memory must be...
Okay, so the serious violence duty makes councils and local services work together to share information and target interventions to prevent and reduce serious violence. I'm not going to read all of it, but I assume we've been given that.
So,
Yeah.
Chair, you could perhaps leave it there.
Yeah,
Leave
leave
it
it
there
now,
for
we'll
now.
take-
We see where devolution goes and
Yes, Jenny.
take a view.
Aren't we doing this with our police advocate scheme that we're on? Because we get weekly reports and they're who we can go to with all of these issues.
No, the issue wasn't that. The issue, the government were putting more responsibilities onto district councils, which weren't there before, top down if you like, and we were expected to do it without any funding. And the concern of Cabinet was, this is happening all the time. We need to analyse how big a problem this is and what the cost implications are. But I think quite rightly what both Tracy and Anita are saying is, wait and see what happens with devolution, because were we responsible for, well, somebody else will be responsible for the whole lot. But let's just hold fire on that one. So, I think we've done. I think that's that one. What I would say now, we're going to, that's the end of the meeting, and thank you very much for your attendance and some excellent contributions and some interesting outcomes. What we're now going to do is I'm going to now hand over to Andrew, who's, you want to,
Close the meeting.
we'll close the meeting and then we'll go into a private session to talk about the future plan. But if you want, if we have 5 minutes, and I think probably it'll take us 20 minutes to